Hello and welcome to the NB Media Co-op. My name is Ryan Hillier and I'm joined by producer David Gordon Koch. Today we're speaking with Professor Jeff Houlahan. He's a professor of biology at the University of New Brunswick Saint John campus. He's also part of the Palestine Solidarity Movement. Readers of the NB Media Co-op might recall that he was issued a trespass notice by UNB security last year after activists set up a tent at their protest site. Now he's heading to Egypt as part of the global march to Gaza. Up to 2,000 people from around the world are expected to take part in this peaceful initiative. On June 15th, they will march to Egypt's border with the Gaza Strip, where the southern Gaza city of Rafah is located. They aim to draw attention to Israel's ongoing assault on Gaza, widely condemned as a genocide. They are calling upon the Israeli authorities to halt the blockade and open the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Palestine. Professor Houlahan, thank you for joining us.
Oh, happy to be here.
So, what compelled you to take the journey to Egypt?
Yeah, well, it's funny because it goes right back to last summer. Really what had happened was I was watching the students at the universities, the young students out protesting, and was, to be frank, just deeply moved by it, feeling like, where are the kind of elders on this? Where are the people who maybe have a little more influence? And they were nowhere. And so that's why I went out at that time and started protesting at UNB Saint John. And then we were there for 10 weeks and I went away on sabbatical with my wife and we had a lot of fun and enjoyed it and all of that. But I felt a bit untethered and unconnected to this issue, which was just growing worse and worse and worse. And so when we got back, I saw the notice for it, the March to Gaza, and you just have to volunteer to go. And that was, it was that I had this sense that I wasn't doing much and that was kind of intolerable, that I had to do something. And so that was all. And I don't even have any illusion. I don't know what this will mean. I don't know what difference these things make ultimately, but it just makes a difference in my day-to-day life to feel like you're doing something.
Hmm. Can you tell us a little bit more about the organization behind the Global March to Gaza, what the goals are?
Yeah. So, first of all, there's no government involvement on this of any kind. Like at this point, I think we're at 32 delegations, so 32 different countries. And it really is kind of grassroots. Like the coordinator for the Canadian delegation is from an organization in Montreal called Palestine Vivre. But really, it's not like there's funding behind this. It's just people coming forward. And it's the same, I think, at every one of the delegations. And so, we have our coordinator, Manuel Tapial, and he's, these things are pretty non-hierarchical. It really is. You're just signing up and everybody contributes. And then the coordinators are kind of in communication. So the bigger project, is coordinated. But, it really is a fairly loose collaboration. And at this point, but coordinated enough that we will all be arriving in Cairo on June 12th, that we'll stay one night in Cairo and then buses to al-Arish. Al-Arish is about 50 kilometers from Rafah. We'll march over 2 days to Rafah. And I think, that's where that crossing is where we have the hundreds and maybe thousands of trucks that are sitting there full of food and supplies, humanitarian aid, much of the food beginning to rot while kids are starving. And so just trying to bring some attention to that. And then probably around the 19th, or I think the 19th, we head back to Cairo by bus and then people fly home.
Hmm. So, do you expect any difficulties traveling to Egypt or returning? Do you expect
Yeah.
any friction either direction?
Yeah, this is, for me, certainly this kind of scale of activism is really new to me. But our coordinator, Manuel Tapiala, he was actually, I don't know if you remember this, but in 2009, kind of the original Freedom Flotilla was boarded by Israeli commandos, and they killed 9 of the activists on board. And Manuel was on board that boat, and so you know you realize with these things, if you're going to do them, that there is a certain amount of uncertainty. They've been every country has contacted their embassy, their Egyptian embassy, and had discussions with them. But we aren't sure when we get there how this is going to be met. And so, there is a plan B of potentially, if they simply won't allow it, that we'll stay and protest in Cairo. But that certainly would be a disappointment. And what we're hoping is that there does seem to be certainly a shift. We're seeing a shift out of Europe. We're seeing a shift even in Canada, at least the words. And so, what we're doing to me is consistent with what many countries are calling for. We're not like at this point, there's really what we're talking about is lift the siege, let food and medical supplies through, stop killing people. We don't have a really nuanced position on a whole bunch of other things. There are people dying every day. And so hopefully this is in line with what we're seeing more and more countries adopt, and that this will be seen as in Egypt as something they would be willing to support.
Hmm. You
Yeah.
mentioned you're not sure about the possible repercussions. Are you at all, concerned that there could be violence? We've seen, there's been very low level kind of skirmishes between Egyptian forces and the Israeli forces on the border at certain points. Yeah, what is your level of concern about that, and how close, do you anticipate that you'll be able to get?
Yeah. And I guess so on the question of how concerned am I guess, I certainly think part of the reason that it's organized this way is I think if you got a Canadian passport or a Swiss passport or a US passport, you're more immune. And like we have Egyptians on the ground that are helping us, and I think they're in far more danger than we are. So I wouldn't say I'm particularly concerned in that way. Of course, these folks that are more experienced, they're saying, you know, questioning, detention, deportation, all of these things are possibilities. You have to go there not thinking you're on a holiday. You are there doing something that could potentially governments could react badly to. But one of the things that's been really, because all of us that are part of the Canadian delegation, or at least I knew none of them at the beginning. So, and what you realize is it's a diverse group, straight, queer, brown, white, male, female, like it's a very diverse group of people. And you realize very quickly that people have a real common objective here. And they're putting aside whatever petty differences they have on this much larger issue. And I really, even in the few weeks we've been talking, I just have this strong sense that people have my back and they will have my back when we're there. So as far as how close we'll get, I got to admit, I don't like, my understanding is that Rafah sits basically on the border. So my guess is, depending on how hardline any of the IDF soldiers are there, like I'm guessing we're going to be looking at the fence, potentially, within arm's length of the fence. I don't know.
Hmm.
See when we get there. But yeah, so I wouldn't say I'm really nervous about this, but you might want to ask my kids what they think about that.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Are there any other participants from New Brunswick that are going with you?
Not so far. And so, and as far as I know, I don't even think we've got anybody else from Atlantic Canada. Like we've got people from, Atlantic Canada to Vancouver. But part of what we're trying to do with this is hopefully the word gets out there. And our delegation in the last week or 10 days has gone from, I think, 8 people to 20, and there's new people every day. And the other thing I'll say is it's also it's going to be very important that there are people at home that are amplifying this. If we go there, even as 2,000 people and nobody pays attention, this is going to be something that fizzles out very quickly. So it is going to be important. I mean, for people, and it's hard for people, right? Because this is all out of pocket. Like there's people that just simply can't afford to do this. As a professor at a university, I can afford to go. It's as simple as that. And so, those people that are staying home are going to be just as important in terms of distributing the message. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, to touch on that, about self-financing. So that's the most kind of, I think, inspiring thing about this group is all of these people are paying for their trip to Egypt. They're doing it because they really feel compelled to.
Yeah. And my guess, like when I see the people that are there, people that aren't doing as well as I am, I'm guessing there's lots of people just sticking this on a credit card and hoping there's a way they can pay for it when they get back.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Switching gears, I wanted to ask you about what is the latest information that you're getting with the current situation with the blockade? We know that a little bit of aid, trickles of aid have been entering Gaza, which we've also gotten reports that there's been, looting of these trucks. Where there's reports that the Israeli forces have been attacking some of the security forces in Gaza that are trying to protect those aid convoys and allowing the looting to happen. Um, but what is your sense of where the blockade is at right now?
Yeah, and I won't pretend I have any inside knowledge on this. I think I'm reading the same reports other people are, maybe because I have a lot of interest in it. I may hear a wider range, but certainly, you know, the because what they've started now, I think, I forget what they're calling it, the Gaza Humanitarian Service, that is really an Israeli US project. And at this point, the way it's been arranged, it sounds like it is absolutely just a salve for, Western concerns. So maybe Canada and France and the UK, Germany, they won't actually do anything if we at least give them a little picture of that we're providing aid. But to me, it's been so cynical and obvious that the only way Western countries can accept this is if they truly just give us something, just give us anything that will allow us to ignore this. Because, I mean, it's been pretty well documented that what's happening is they're handing out these little boxes of food, basically individual dinners almost, and that Palestinians have to walk 15 or 20 kilometers to get to the sites. And that, in fact, today, Dropsite just reported that someone was picked up, that because they're able to identify people coming for food, they decided that this Palestinian was a threat, and they basically disappeared him. Like,
Mhm.
his
We've
family doesn't
seen,
know
yeah.
his family doesn't know where he is.
Yeah, we've seen those reports of the biometric identification of Palestinians and tying that to aid. So there is an entire technocratic element to that, which is very disconcerting, very concerning. Um, so you're seeking to raise awareness, obviously, about this horrific situation in Gaza, and I was wondering if you could comment on how the Canadian news media has dealt with um, Palestine solidarity actions and protests and pro-Palestine sentiment in Canada.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So, from a general sense, it's felt like, well, certainly at the beginning, it felt to me clearly like this, that Israel was the aggrieved party here. I suspect people that had some sense of the history of this, even by October 8th, were going, oh, this is going to go very badly for the Palestinians, I suspect. But that was certainly not the message that you were getting from the CBC or from any of the mainstream media. And I think still, I feel like the coverage of this tends to be around primarily concerns about anti-Semitism and how that's been weaponized to really promote an Israeli agenda. I do feel like there does seem to be a bit of a turning point here. Like, not that I admire this guy at all, but the fact that someone as prominent as Piers Morgan is going to come out and say, I was wrong, this seems like a shift, for whatever reason he would choose to do that. And so, certainly in the Canadian media, it's the independent people, not to plug you guys, but the NB Media Co-op, to me, has taken a principled stand on this from the beginning, and I think some of the other independent organizations have as well. But even like when we had we did end up doing a story with CBC last year about the protest, but it really chose to focus on, the faculty administration conflict, not really about the issues of Palestine, and not even about really the issues of, arresting people for putting up a tent. It was more like, oh, this is creating friction between the president and faculty. How does that go? And so I guess I've been really disappointed. This is no surprise to anybody, I suspect, who pays attention to this, that, certainly the mainstream on this has been just woefully lacking in presenting this in any realistic way, just how tragic and awful what's happening is.
Yeah. We had Palestine solidarity actions throughout New Brunswick, on and off, especially, after October 7th, 2023 and onward, but there's been ebbs and flows. But St. John seems to have been one of the most consistent areas where, you see Palestine solidarity action. I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to that.
Yeah.
What in particular do you find that is it about St. John that would lend itself to support for Palestine, or what is the historical precedent?
Yeah, because there's three groups here, and I'm probably missing some, but there's Women for Palestine here in St. John. There is the Palestine Solidarity Committee of St. John, and there's the Atlantic Canada Palestine Collective. And every one of them, well, I think there's a couple of things. Like certainly part of it is we do have uh, I don't know if this happened as much in Fredericton, but we have a relatively large refugee community that is primarily Muslim. So we do have a really strong Muslim community here. The representative of the Atlantic Canada Palestine Collective, Halmi Al-Farah, he's from Gaza, and like I think all Gazans at this point has lost more than 100 friends and family there. I think this motivates you to stay committed to this. And so, that group of people is out there every Saturday and has been since October 8th and has, at other points tried to bring this to the attention of our MP, Wayne Long here. It's created, there's been some contentious moments. And really, we're feeling like we hope that those Liberal MPs that were, I would say, more obstructive than helpful, will see at least this new announcement maybe gives them a pathway to provide the support that we're going to need when we head to Cairo. But yeah, the community here, and then at the university, there's been this core of young students who have also been very committed to this.
Yeah, the campus support has been pretty incredible. I mean, obviously we've seen what's happening in the U.S. with the campus demonstrations and occupations and solidarity actions, and the reaction to that has been quite, I think, shocking to many people. We see some pretty severe examples of crackdown on those solidarity actions, both in the U.S. and Canada, with travel restrictions, increased scrutiny of academics and outspoken voices who oppose the policies of mass starvation, mass bombing, mass surveillance, mass incarceration of
No, and
Palestine.
UNB has been, I would say, particularly disappointing. When because what's happened throughout this is that as these students have been doing this, the university has been basically making these unilateral decisions about investment, about what academic freedom means, about many things that, to me, how you deal with protests, many things to me that are really, in terms of collegial governance, not meant for the president to make decisions about. Now, I have to say, it's our responsibility as faculty to hold him to account on that. And we've got a collective agreement bargaining coming, and hopefully we'll do that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, to touch on that point, I wanted to ask, obviously we're seeing such a straining of the Western commitment to liberal values, the idea of free speech, free assembly, freedom of association, those kind of things. How important is it for people to continue to exercise the rights that they enjoy and have, and voicing their objection to what's happening in Palestine?
No, I think it's incredibly important, and I think it is delusional to imagine that administration will be on side with you because that's just not where their interest lies. Their interests lie in increasing revenues, increasing students, increasing profile. This idea of actually adhering to important principles, I think this is going to be in the hands of faculty. If they rely on their senior administrators, the incentives just aren't there. And, I can't rely, at this point, it's obvious to me we can't rely on their personal integrity. They're following the incentives. And at this point, they're, the incentive to encourage free speech is just not there. We're going to have to demand it.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing the extreme reaction to that in the US in particular, where the policies are so stringent that international students are either leaving or refusing to enroll in the US, and that, there'll be long-term impacts. And could you speak maybe to that? What these policies, if implemented by some of the university administration, what are the long-term implications of shutting down free speech like that?
Well, certainly when I see what they're doing in the United States, I go, you know, this is as authoritarian as anywhere. Like I mean, if they wanted to call out, Russia for jailing, people that dissent, I feel like, well, okay, we're absolutely deporting people and have people in detention with no charges. I go, I don't see anywhere here where you can suggest at this point that, the light on the hill is any different from any of these other authoritarian countries. Now, I certainly think we're buffered a little. I have to say, I don't think it's as bad here. And I think that's partly because, in the US, they're so closely aligned with Israel, and the political incentives are so strongly aligned with supporting Israel. For us, I don't think we have quite the same direct pressure, but we're right next door to the US. We are incredibly influenced by the US. And so I think it's one step removed, which is why it's not as bad. But I still think the implications are bad for us because it's difficult to step out of lockstep with the US. But, I think back to 2011, I think it was, no, much earlier than 2011, but it was the Chrétien government, I think, that chose not to go to Iraq despite being asked to go to Iraq. And that was a moment as a Canadian where I went, wow, I'm not a big patriot. I don't have those huge patriotic, but that moment to feel like, oh, you're having the courage not to just step in line. You're having the courage not to go. In that moment, I was proud to be Canadian.
Mm. Yeah, I wanted to. That's a great answer. I wanted to turn a little bit to your focus as an academic. You're an ecologist, you're a conservation biologist. Um, in the context of your work in ecology, what does the ongoing destruction in Gaza mean to you? In other words, how does the environmental destruction, the destruction of food systems, and so much remaking of the natural landscape through warfare and the actions of the Israeli military, how should that inform we should kind of think about the future that the administration in the U.S. Uh, wants? They're the ones that are financing and arming this genocide. So what are your thoughts on that?
I totally understand this question, and but in some ways, I feel like I feel like I disappoint people with my answer because I see these as very separate things. I don't actually see much connection with my scientific work. Yeah, I've done work in conservation biology, but you know, the decisions about conservation are often ethical decisions and values decisions. They're not fact decisions. And people have different sets of values. Uh, but here, the issue is so huge that to me, there is not a plausible place to say, oh no, what's happening in Gaza is appropriate and right. Whereas on many issues where ethically, in terms of conservation, I might be on one side, there are plausible arguments that no, we need the growth so that we can feed our poor, whatever the argument is, right? They can make plausible arguments. So yeah, I don't see much. I admit, yeah, there's just horrible environmental destruction going on there. That's kind of routine, but it's the least. I actually go, sorry, if we kill a bunch of plants and wildlife, I'm afraid my concerns are not with them right now. My
Hmm.
concerns are with the children of Gaza and what's happening there, you know. So yeah, to me there's a very logical connection there, except it doesn't work for me very well.
Yeah. No, that's a great answer. I'm glad to have got your perspective on it. Um, was there any is there any are there any final thoughts that you want to leave with as we close out?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but I guess my feeling about this is that for anybody who's coming to this, because you will hear people talk about complexity and it's complicated, and I feel like, look, the solution to this is going to be complex, but what's happening now is not complicated. There is nothing complicated about this. And the only way that anybody can be okay with this is if they really believe that the people of Gaza are just different and less than us. That's the only way you can imagine this to be acceptable. Just give me a moment here.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're all alike on this. We all stand looking down on our children as they sleep. Peacefully and safely is what we want. And we all want to wake up in the morning and be able to feed them. This is all of us. And if people understand that, if people can internalize that, they couldn't accept this.
Yeah, that's a very powerful and apt, I think, way to express these yeah, deep feelings of horror and disgust that I think that a lot of us are feeling right now. So, Professor Houlahan, thank you so much for taking some time to speak with us, and best of luck in your travels. We wish you all the best, and we hope you return safely.
Thanks so much, Ryan. I've really enjoyed this. Yeah.
We've been speaking with Professor Jeff Houlahan, who is a professor of biology at the University of New Brunswick Saint John campus. He's heading to Egypt for the Global March to Gaza, taking place on June 15th. You can find more information at marchtogaza.net. If you like what we do, please consider joining the NB Media Co-op at nbmediacoop.org. You can become a member with a small donation and help us produce more local journalism content like this. For the NB Media Co-op, I'm Ryan Hillier, and I've been joined by producer David Gordon Koch. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.